Taggart has said that I like to play country music and I like to be in a band, but I don't care about the fame. Well, Merle didn't have much choice because when you're as good as he is, fame just sort of sneaks up on you.
You've seen the headlines claiming Willie Nelson has a hit list of evil artists. But here's the thing. Willie doesn't do hate lists. He does diagnosis. We're ranking the 6 faces of the corporate machine that rewards outrage and dilutes things. And trust me, our second pick isn't even a villain. It's a warning. But to understand today's villains, you have to start with the first makeover that taught Nashville it could re-engineer authenticity. Why the story keeps spreading. So, let's address the elephant in the room right away. If you spend any time on the internet, you've probably seen these stories floating around about Willie Nelson finally losing it and naming a hit list of artists he thinks are destroying the genre. It makes for a great thumbnail, doesn't it? But here's the thing. If you actually look at the last 70 years of this man's life, that just isn't who Willie is. We're talking about the guy who literally invented the outlaw movement just so everyone could have a seat at the table. He's the bridge builder of American music. He's not the guy sitting in his tour bus with a burn book. And yet, these stories spread like wildfire. Why is that? Well, it's because we're all looking for a simple villain to explain why country music feels different than it used to. We want to believe that there's a specific evil artist we can point at. But wait, it gets a bit more complicated because while that specific hate list is a total fabrication, Willie Nelson has actually been very vocal about something he finds genuinely dangerous for the music he loves. In recent profiles, like that massive deep dive in The New Yorker or his 2025 conversations with GQ, Willie keeps coming back to the same word: watered down. Think about that for a second. This is a man who is nearly 93 years old, and he's still sharp enough to diagnose the corporate cancer eating at the heart of Nashville. He doesn't call individual artists evil, but he does see the industry as a machine that strips away the soul and replaces it with something artificial. Now, here's where it gets interesting for our purposes today. Since Willie won't give you a clickbait list of people he hates, we've done the heavy lifting for you. We are going to look at the 6 most evil faces of that corporate machine. But let's set the ground rules right now. When we say evil in this video, we aren't talking about personal gossip or who was mean to a waiter. We're talking about repeatable industry behaviors. We're talking about the moments where the machine chose profit over people, or where an artist became a vessel for a system that rewards division over actual songwriting. Every single entry on this list from number 6 down to number 1 is backed by verifiable sources, dates, and actual recorded events. No rumors, just receipts. We are looking at this like a documentary. We're tracing the evolution of how the music went from the raw, dusty soul of the 1970s outlaws to the highly polished, often divisive product we see in 2025. If Willie called mainstream country watered down, what do you think the genre is actually losing? Is it the honesty, or is it the grit? And get this, you're going to want to stay tuned for when we hit the number 2 spot. That one is a total shock, because it isn't about an artist doing something evil at all. It's actually a story about how the industry can take a group of artists and essentially try to erase them as a warning to everyone else. But to understand how we got to that point, and to understand why the machine works the way it does, we have to go back. We have to look at the very first time Nashville realized it could take the roughness out of country, wrap it in a tuxedo, and sell it back to the public as something better. Reward loop. Let's go to the exact moment the industry learned it could re-engineer authenticity. How Chet Atkins helped invent safe country. To find our first villain on the list, we have to go back to the late 1950s. And here's the thing that's going to mess with your head. Our number 6 is actually one of the most beloved figures in music history. I'm talking about Chet Atkins. Now, before you throw your phone, remember our rule. We're looking at the machine, not the man. Chet was a genius guitar player and a total gentleman, but but he was also the architect of something called the Nashville Sound. And that, right there, is where the evil of the industry really began to take root. Now here's where it gets interesting. Back in 1957, country music was literally dying. Elvis and the rock and roll explosion were vacuuming up all the money. The hillbilly sound was suddenly seen as old, dusty, and most importantly for the suits, unmarketable. Chet Atkins and a producer named Owen Bradley realized that if country music was going to survive, it had to cross over to the pop charts. They had to make it safe for people who didn't live on farms. So they did something radical. They started stripping the country out of country music. They took out the fiddles because they sounded too hick. They buried the steel guitars because they were too mournful. Instead, they brought in smooth string sections, polished background singers like the Jordanaires, and a production style that was as clean as a new Cadillac. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just a creative choice. It was a cold, calculated industrial pivot. According to historical deep dives, this was the moment Nashville learned that authenticity was something you could engineer in a lab. They realized they didn't need the raw, whiskey-soaked honesty of the 1940s. They needed safe country. They needed a product that wouldn't offend the suburban housewives who were buying records in 1962. And wait, it gets weirder. This smooth operator approach created the very first gatekeeping template. For the first time, if you didn't fit this polished mold, you simply didn't get played. This is exactly why Willie Nelson struggled so much in his early years. Nashville tried to turn him into a clean-cut crooner. They put him in suits and layered his voice under thick blankets of violins. Willie literally couldn't be himself because the machine that Chet helped build wouldn't allow for any roughness. When Willie looks back at the genre today and calls it watered down, he's not just complaining about modern radio. He's reacting to a template that was set in stone 60 years ago. He saw firsthand how the industry decided that polish was more important than soul. It's a mechanism where the production choices become identity choices. If you want to be successful, you have to play by the rules of the room. And the room was designed to be as safe and inoffensive as possible. So I have to ask, do you hear that Nashville Polish as professionalism, or do you hear it as a form of control? Is a string section just a beautiful addition, or is it a way to drown out the grit of the real world? Here's the thing, though. Once Nashville learned it could sell a mood by smoothing over the cracks, they were hooked on the profit. But as the decades rolled on, they discovered something even more lucrative than selling a polished sound. They discovered that if you could re-engineer an artist's sound, you could eventually re-engineer their message. They moved from selling a mood to selling a flag. Number 5, Toby Keith. So, if our number 6 was about smoothing out the sound, our number 5 is about sharpening the message into a weapon. We have to talk about the early 2000s. Picture this. It's late 2001. The dust from the towers hasn't even settled, and the entire country is essentially a raw nerve. Every artist in Nashville is trying to figure out what to say, or if they should say anything at all. Then Toby Keith scribbles some lyrics on the back of a UPS box while he's on his tour bus. That song became courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, and honestly, it changed the incentive structure of country music forever. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying Toby Keith was an evil guy. By most accounts, he was a massive supporter of the troops, and a guy who really believed what he was singing. But the machine saw something in that song that they couldn't unsee. They saw a shortcut to massive, unquestionable profit through outrage. Time magazine actually did a fascinating look back at how this song became a cultural lightning rod. It wasn't just a hit, it was a litmus test. For the first time, the industry realized that if they could wrap aggression in a flag, they didn't just get listeners, they got soldiers. They found out that they could monetize the feeling of us versus them at a scale we'd never seen before. But wait, it gets weirder. This era essentially trained the country music audience to treat any form of disagreement as literal betrayal. It created this environment where, if you weren't waving the flag as hard as the person next to you, you were suspicious. The industry didn't just let Toby Keith sing his song. They used that energy to set a new rulebook for everyone else. They learned that country wasn't just a genre of music anymore. It was an identity that you had to prove you belonged to. And get this, once that door was opened, there was no closing it. The industry realized that keeping the wound open was actually good for business. If people are angry, they're engaged. If they're engaged, they're buying records and concert tickets to show which side they're on. It's a mechanism that rewards the loudest, most aggressive voice while silencing anyone who wants to ask a difficult question. Actually, we see the direct fallout of this in our number 2 spot later on. But for now, think about what this did to the songwriting. It shifted the focus from universal human stories, the stuff Willie Nelson lives for, to these highly specific, highly charged political statements. It stopped being about the 3 chords and the truth and started being about 3 chords and a list of people we don't like. I have to ask you, looking back at that 2002 era, do you think country music was actually helping the nation heal? Or was it just training us to pick sides for a profit? Because once the industry learned that outrage could pay the bills, they stopped looking for the next Willie Nelson and started looking for the next viral controversy. Here's the thing. 2 decades later, that same formula hasn't gone away. It's actually just gotten more sophisticated. The industry has moved on from simple patriotic anthems to something much more calculated, music videos and singles that are literally designed to explode on the timeline. Because once Nashville learned they could sell a flag, they realized they could sell a whole culture war. Number 4. Jason Aldean's Small Town Threat. July 2023. Jason Aldean releases the music video for Try That in a Small Town, and within 48 hours, it wasn't just a country song anymore, it was a social grenade. Now, here's where it gets interesting from a technical perspective. We already saw how Toby Keith paved the way for patriotic profit back in 2002, but Aldean's team brought us the 2.0 version. They created a product optimized entirely for the social media era, where the argument is the marketing. The video was literally yanked from CMT after only 3 days of airplay. Reporting from Reuters and Entertainment Weekly pointed out exactly why people were so unsettled, and it wasn't just about the lyrics. The backdrop was the Maury County Courthouse in Columbia, Tennessee. To a lot of people watching, that's just a pretty old building with some pillars, but for those who actually know the history of the area, it's the precise location where an 18-year-old black man named Henry Choate was lynched by a mob in 1927. Critics argued that using a site of such specific historic racial violence for a song about vigilante justice wasn't just an accidental oversight. They saw it as a calculated provocation designed to trigger a very specific reaction. This is where you have to look at the PR playbook that followed, because it was absolutely fascinating to watch. The strategy followed a loop we've seen dozens of times since. First, you deny any racial intent whatsoever. You stick strictly to the small-town values script. Then, you pivot to the cancel culture defense. You claim that you're being victimized by an elite crowd that doesn't understand real Americans. Finally, you wrap the whole thing in a message of unity. And to get this, it worked exactly the way the algorithm wanted it to. When CMT pulled the video, the song didn't fade away into obscurity. It surged. It actually reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is wild when you consider that most of those people weren't necessarily buying it because they loved the melody. They were buying it as a political statement. They were buying it to prove a point to the people they were arguing with online. This is what we mean by outrage as marketing. In the modern machine, the industry has realized that if they can make you angry enough to argue in a comment section, they don't even need a radio promoter anymore. Your anger is their distribution strategy. Every time someone shared a clip to complain about the imagery, they were literally helping the song reach 10 more people who might support it. It's a system where the controversy is the campaign, and the product isn't even the music anymore. The product is the feeling of being right, while everyone else is wrong. Think about that for a second. We've moved from the Nashville sound, trying to make things smooth and safe, to a modern system that intentionally seeks out the most jagged, divisive topics possible because that's what generates the most clicks. It makes the music itself feel like a secondary concern. So I have to ask, when the algorithm starts working like this, who's really being played here? Is it the fans who feel they're defending their way of life? The critics who think they're stopping a harmful message? Or just everyone caught in the middle, watching the numbers climb? Because if you think a backlash of that scale is supposed to stop a career in 2026, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until you see what happened in our number 3 spot. We're going to look at a moment where a massive star was caught on video doing something that should have been a career-ending cancellation reward loop. But instead of falling apart, his numbers did something that completely defied logic and revealed just how much the machine has changed the rules of accountability. Number 3. Morgan Wallen and the Reward Loop, February 2nd, 2021. Morgan Wallen is coming home from a night out in Nashville, and a neighbor's doorbell camera catches him using a racial slur. Within 24 hours, the industry moved faster than we've ever seen. His label, Big Loud Records, suspended his contract indefinitely. Radio giants like iHeartMedia and Cumulus, who basically control what you hear in your car, pulled him from over 400 stations. CMT and even the Academy of Country Music essentially erased his name from their platforms. Now, in any other era, that would be the end. That's a career-ending, game-over screen. But this is where the story gets absolutely fascinating and, honestly, a little bit weird. While the machine was busy hammering him with consequences, the actual market was doing something completely different. According to reporting from PBS and Billboard, Wallen's album sales didn't just stay steady. They surged by a staggering 1,220%. Think about that for a second. His streaming numbers jumped by over 60%, and his album, Dangerous the Double Album, stayed at the #1 spot on the Billboard 200 for 10 consecutive weeks. Here's the thing you have to understand. This wasn't just a group of fans being loyal. It was the reward-let's loop in full effect. In our modern fragmented attention economy, when the institutions, the labels, the award shows, the radio suits try to sanction an artist, they inadvertently create a martyr. For a massive chunk of the country music audience, buying a Morgan Wallen record became a way to talk back to the industry gatekeepers we talked about in Chapter 2. Actually, the conflict created the demand. The more the industry tried to distance itself from him, the more his fans felt they had to lean in. It created this bizarre incentive mismatch, where the institutions are trying to maintain a safe brand for advertisers, while the audience is using their wallets to signal that they don't care about the machine's rules. Wait, it gets weirder. This pattern has effectively taught the industry that accountability is now a profit-driving event. If you can survive the first 48 hours of a scandal, the data suggests you might actually end up wealthier and more famous than you were before the mistake. It's the ultimate contradiction. The industry punishes the behavior, but the system itself, the way we buy, stream, and argue about music, rewards it. This brings up a question that I think about a lot when I look at Willie Nelson's watered-down critique. If the market is literally rewarding outrage and friction, can the industry ever actually discipline behavior again? Or have they just built a machine that is now completely out of their control? Do you think fans should separate the music from the person if the moment or the controversy is exactly what's driving them to the top of the charts? Is buying the record a support of the art, or has it just become another way to pick a side in the culture war? But here's the thing. While Morgan Wallen represents the modern version of this punishment-profit loop, there's a much darker, older story that proves the industry hasn't always been this supportive of artists in the crosshairs. Now for the real twist. Our next spot isn't evil because of something they did. They are on this list because of what the industry did to them. This is the historical template for how Nashville enforces obedience. And unlike what we just saw with Morgan Wallen, this group didn't get a reward loop. They got a total, systematic deletion that lasted for decades. To understand how the machine truly works when it wants to destroy you, we have to look at the night the music died for 3 women who were the biggest stars in the world. Number 2. The evil example. The machine needed. London, March 10th, 2003. The Chicks, who were then the Dixie Chicks, are standing on the stage of the Shepherd's Bush Empire. They are, at this exact second, the biggest group in country music history. They've sold tens of millions of albums. They are untouchable. Then Natalie Maines leans into the mic and tells the crowd she's ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas. It was a 12-word sentence in a foreign country. In today's world, that's a Tuesday morning on X. But in 2003, it was the trigger for the most efficient, cold-blooded deletion in the history of American music. And here's the shock. The Chicks are number 2 on this list, not because they did something evil, but because they are the evil example the industry needed. They are the warning shot Nashville used to keep every other artist in line for the next 20 years. Now, you've probably seen the footage of people crushing CDs with bulldozers. It looks like a grassroots fan revolt, right? But here's the thing. If you look at the actual receipts, like the Radio and Records Hot Facts from March 18, 2003, you see a much darker story. This wasn't just fans being mad. This was a systematic, top-down scrub. Within days, their airplay dropped by over 74%. Huge radio chains didn't just stop playing their new single, they stopped playing their entire catalog. They essentially tried to rewrite history so that the Chicks never happened. And get this, there's a fascinating academic study by a guy named Gabriel Rossman who looked at this exact moment. He found that a blacklist doesn't actually need a single mastermind in a dark room. It just needs a few massive corporations to decide that silence is the safe corporate bet. It's a decentralized form of cowardice that acts like a weapon. The industry learned that it could effectively kill the career of a superstar overnight if they stepped outside the safe country sound we talked about with Chet Atkins. Actually, the climate of fear was so thick that it almost took out Willie Nelson himself. In 2004, Time magazine ran a piece about Willie releasing a song called Whatever Happened to Peace on Earth. He was nearly 71 years old, a living legend, and even he was being asked if he was scared of being blacklisted like the Chicks. Think about that for a second. The machine had become so powerful and so punitive that the man who literally saved the genre in the 70s was looking over his shoulder because he dared to question a war. That is why the Chicks are the number 2 shock. They prove that in Nashville, the machine doesn't just want your music, it wants your obedience. If Morgan Wallen represents the modern reward loop, the Chicks represent the deletion loop. It shows the industry's terrifying double standard. If your controversy makes the right people money, you get a surge. If your controversy threatens the corporate status quo, you get erased. Do you think any genre or industry should have the power to literally erase an artist's entire history because of a political sentence? Does that protect the culture? Or does it just protect the gatekeepers? Because once you realize that the industry can turn a superstar into a ghost, you have to ask yourself, who's really in charge? Which brings us to the next artist. Well, this one, you can't cancel, you can't boycott, and it never has to apologize for its mistakes. It's the thing that's actually running the show in 2026. Number 1. The Faceless Artist. If you've been waiting for a single name to drop at number 1, a villain with a face you can recognize, here is the uncomfortable truth. You can't look this artist in the eye because it isn't a person at all. The number 1 evil artist in country music is the incentive machine itself. It's the faceless operating system of the modern industry that has slowly replaced human songwriting with a mathematical model of what it thinks will make you angry enough to click. Think about everything we've looked at so far. We saw how Chet Atkins started by smoothing out the sound to make it safe for the masses. We saw how that evolved into Toby Keith's shortcut to patriotic profit, which then morphed into Jason Aldean using outrage as a literal marketing budget. Finally, we saw how the system actually rewards scandals like Morgan Wallen's while using the chicks as a sacrificial warning to anyone who wants to stay independent. Here's the thing. These aren't 6 separate stories. There are 6 different features of the same machine. This is what academics like Gabriel Rossman talk about when they study how industries enforce behavior. You don't need a secret room full of executives plotting how to ruin country music. You just need a system where every single gatekeeper is incentivized to choose the safe or profitable bet over the real one. It's a decentralized form of control. If a song that causes a massive argument on the timeline gets 10 times more streams than a song about a broken heart, the machine is going to demand more arguments. It doesn't care about the music, it cares about the high-velocity engagement. Now, compare that to Willie Nelson. In those recent profiles in The New Yorker and Time, you see a man who is essentially the control sample for a version of humanity the machine can't replicate. Willie's whole philosophy is built on the idea that music should be a bridge. He literally spent his career bringing hippies and rednecks together in the same room. But wait, it gets weirder. The machine actually hates that. Bridges are hard to monetize. Walls, however, walls are incredibly profitable. If you can convince an audience that they are under attack, or that their identity is tied to a specific artist's controversy, you've created a customer for life. Actually, that's the evil at the heart of the business in 2026. The machine has learned how to manufacture authenticity. It's learned that it can take the outlaw spirit Willie invented and turn it into a costume. It sells you the feeling of being a rebel, while ensuring you never actually say anything that threatens the bottom line. It's an operating system designed to keep the wound open because, as long as we're arguing about which artist is evil, we aren't looking at the system that's making us argue in the first place. Willie Nelson isn't naming a list of enemies because he knows that's just more fuel for the fire. He spent 70 years trying to tell us that the music is the truth, and everything else is just watered-down noise. The machine rewards division, but Willie rewards the community. One of those is an empire built on sand, and the other is a 93-year-old man still playing a guitar named Trigger that's literally held together by the songs he's played on it. So, I have to ask you, what would you actually reward if the algorithm weren't doing the choosing for you? Would it be the storytelling, the musicianship, the community? Or are we all just too addicted to the argument to stop? Because if we keep rewarding the division, the machine doesn't even need to find new villains. It will just keep manufacturing them. Which brings us to a final question. After all this, did we actually find 6 evil artists? Or just 6 warnings that Willie's been hinting at the whole time? Willie didn't give us a list of enemies, he gave us a map of the machine. Number 2 was the punishment template. Number 1 was the system that profits from your division. Which entry felt most unfair and which was undeniable? Drop your ranking below.